In a small, picturesque town, there was an antique shop known for its collection of rare and beautiful mirrors. The shop was run by Mrs. Delaney, an elderly woman with a keen eye for valuable antiques. Among the mirrors there was one that stood out, a large, ornate mirror, with an intricate frame and a dark history. The mirror was said to be cursed, and those who gazed into it were doomed to see their deepest fears and darkest secrets. Despite the warnings, the mirror attracted the curiosity of many, including a young woman named Grace. She had recently moved to the town and was drawn to the antique shop's charm. One rainy afternoon, Grace visited the shop and found herself captivated by the mirror. Mrs. Delaney warned her of its curse, but Grace was intrigued and decided to buy it. She took the mirror home and hung it in her living room, unaware of the danger it posed. That night, as Grace prepared for bed, she glanced at the mirror and saw a fleeting shadow. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the next morning she found strange symbols etched into the mirror's surface. The symbols seemed to pulse with a dark energy, filling her with a sense of unease. Over the next few days, Grace experienced a series of terrifying visions. The mirror showed her images of her past mistakes, her insecurities, and her deepest fears. The visions grew more intense, and she began to hear whispers, voices taunting her and feeding her doubts. Determined to break the mirror's curse, Grace returned to the antique shop to seek Mrs. Delaney's help. The old woman revealed that the mirror had once belonged to a powerful sorcerer who had used it to trap the souls of his enemies. The curse could only be lifted by performing a ritual to release the trapped soul and cleanse the mirror. With Mrs. Delaney's guidance, Grace gathered the necessary items for the ritual: a silver candle, a bowl of salt, and a piece of obsidian. She returned home and set up the ritual in front of the mirror. The air grew cold, and the symbols on the mirror glowed with an ominous light. As Grace began the ritual, the whispers grew louder, and the mirror's surface seemed to ripple. She recited the incantation, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. The room filled with a blinding light, and the trapped souls appeared, their faces filled with anguish and desperation. The light intensified, and the mirror shattered. The curse lifted. The souls were freed, and the oppressive presence vanished. Grace felt a wave of relief wash over her, the darkness that had plagued her finally gone. She thanked Mrs. Delaney for her help and returned to the antique shop to share the story of the mirror's curse. The shopkeeper listened with a knowing smile, pleased that the mirror's dark legacy had come to an end. The tale of the cursed mirror spread through the town, a reminder of the dangers hidden within beautiful things and the strength of the human spirit to overcome darkness. Grace continued to visit the antique shop, her bond with Mrs. Delaney growing stronger, and her appreciation for the town's rich history deepening with each passing day. In a remote corner of the world, hidden deep within a dense forest, there was a monastery known as the Silent Sanctuary. The monks who lived there had taken a vow of silence, dedicating their lives to meditation and prayer. The sanctuary was a place of peace and solitude, but it was also shrouded in mystery. The story begins with Daniel, a young archaeologist who had heard rumors of the Silent Sanctuary and its hidden treasures. Intrigued by the tales, he set out on an expedition to find the monastery and uncover its secrets. He traveled through rugged terrain, guided by old maps and local legends. After days of searching, Daniel finally found the sanctuary, its stone walls covered in ivy and moss. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. He approached the entrance, feeling a sense of awe and reverence. The monks welcomed him silently, their expressions calm and serene. Daniel was given a small cell to stay in and was invited to join them in their daily rituals. Despite the silence, he felt a deep connection with the monks and the tranquil environment. As he explored the sanctuary, Daniel discovered an old hidden library filled with ancient texts and scrolls. Among them, he found a journal written by a monk named Brother Anselm. The journal detailed the history of the sanctuary and the strange occurrences that had plagued it for centuries. Brother Anselm wrote of a dark presence that haunted the sanctuary, a malevolent spirit known as the Wraith. The Wraith was a former monk who had been consumed by anger and jealousy, leading him to betray his brethren. His spirit had been bound to the sanctuary, feeding off the fear and despair of those within its walls. Determined to free the sanctuary from the Wraith's grip, Daniel continued to read the journal, hoping to find a way to banish the spirit. He learned of an ancient ritual that could cleanse the sanctuary and release the trapped souls. The ritual required a pure heart and unwavering faith. One night, as Daniel prepared for the ritual, he felt a cold breeze and heard faint whispers. The Wraith appeared before him, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. The spirit tried to sow doubt in Daniel's mind, taunting him with visions of failure and despair. Despite the Wraith's attempts to break his resolve, Daniel stood firm. He gathered the necessary items for the ritual: a white candle, a vial of holy water, and a sacred talisman. The monks joined him in the central courtyard, their silent presence giving him strength. As Daniel began the ritual, the air grew colder, and the Wraith's whispers grew louder. The candle flickered, but he continued, reciting the ancient incantation. The monks formed a circle around him, their silent prayers creating a barrier of light. The Wraith let out a furious scream as the light grew brighter, engulfing the courtyard. The shadows dissolved, and the cold presence vanished. The sanctuary was filled with a sense of peace and warmth. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. Daniel knew that the Wraith had been banished, and the souls of the monks were finally at rest. He thanked the monks for their support and left the sanctuary, his heart filled with gratitude and awe. He returned to civilization, documenting his journey and the incredible story of the Silent Sanctuary. The tale of the Silent Sanctuary became a symbol of hope and redemption, a reminder of the power of faith and the resilience of the human spirit. Daniel's discovery captivated the world, shedding light on the mysteries of the past and inspiring future generations to seek the truth. In the remote countryside of England, there was an old abandoned railway line that had once connected small villages to the bustling cities. The railway had fallen into disuse after a tragic accident that claimed the lives of an entire train's passengers and crew. The locals believed the railway was haunted by the spirits of those who had perished, and they spoke of a phantom train that appeared on foggy nights, replaying the events of that fateful journey. Evelyn, a historian and paranormal investigator, arrived in the area to research the legend of the phantom train. She was fascinated by the stories and wanted to uncover the truth behind the haunting. She set up her base in a small village near the railway and began interviewing the locals. The villagers recounted eerie tales of seeing the ghostly train pass by, its lights flickering in the mist, and the sound of its whistle echoing through the night. They spoke of shadowy figures seen near the tracks and the feeling of an unseen presence watching them. Despite the fear and superstition, Evelyn was determined to investigate. One foggy evening, Evelyn ventured to the old railway line, armed with her camera and recording equipment. She followed the tracks, the dense fog swallowing her surroundings and muffling the sounds of the night. As she walked, she felt a growing sense of unease, as if she were being watched. Suddenly, she heard the distant sound of a train whistle. She quickened her pace, and through the fog, she saw the faint glow of train lights. The ghostly train appeared, its carriages shimmering with an otherworldly light. Evelyn stood by the tracks, her camera capturing the eerie sight. As the train passed, she saw the faces of the passengers, their expressions frozen in fear and despair. The conductor, a stern-looking man with hollow eyes, stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The train slowed to a stop, and Evelyn felt a cold breeze as the doors opened. Drawn by an unseen force, Evelyn stepped onto the train. The interior was filled with the sound of hushed whispers and distant cries. The passengers, unaware of her presence, relived the moments leading up to the accident. She moved through the carriages, her heart pounding with fear and sorrow. In the last carriage, she found the source of the haunting, a young girl clutching a teddy bear, her eyes filled with tears. Evelyn knelt beside her and asked her name. The girl looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Emily," she said. "We were going to see my daddy." Evelyn realized that Emily's spirit was the key to freeing the others. She comforted the girl and promised to help her. Emily led her to the front of the train, where the conductor stood. He looked at Evelyn with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "The accident was my fault," he said. "I couldn't save them." Evelyn understood that the conductor's guilt had bound the spirits to the train. She told him that it was time to let go, that they needed to move on. The conductor nodded, and the train began to dissolve into the mist. As the ghostly train vanished, Evelyn found herself back on the tracks, the fog lifting to reveal the first light of dawn. The haunting presence was gone, and the railway was silent. Evelyn knew that the spirits had been freed, their tragic journey finally at an end. She returned to the village and shared her experience with the locals, who were relieved and grateful. The legend of the phantom train faded into history, a reminder of the power of forgiveness and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Evelyn documented her findings, her story captivating readers and shedding light on the mysteries of the past. In a remote mountain village, there was a tradition that had been passed down for generations. Every night, a group of villagers known as the Night Watchers would patrol the outskirts, keeping an eye out for the creatures that lurked in the darkness. The Night Watchers were tasked with protecting the village from these unseen threats, and their stories were filled with tales of bravery and terror. One winter, a young man named Lucas joined the Night Watchers. He had heard the stories all his life, but had never believed in the creatures. He thought it was just a way to keep the village children from wandering too far at night. But as he began his patrols, he quickly realized that the legends were all too real. The Night Watchers patrolled in pairs, and Lucas was partnered with an older, experienced watcher named Greta. She had been a night watcher for decades and had seen things that still haunted her dreams. She warned Lucas to always stay alert and never venture too far from the village boundaries. One night, as they patrolled the eastern edge of the village, they heard strange noises coming from the forest. The trees seemed to whisper, and the wind carried eerie, indistinct voices. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine, but Greta urged him to stay calm. They followed the sounds to a clearing where they found a circle of stones, each one covered in ancient runes. At the center of the circle was a large, gnarled tree, its branches twisted and blackened. Greta explained that this was the Heart Tree, a place of dark power that the creatures were drawn to. As they examined the tree, they saw movement in the shadows. Tall, slender figures with glowing eyes emerged from the darkness, their forms shifting and flickering. Lucas felt a wave of fear wash over him, but Greta stood her ground, her eyes fixed on the creatures. The creatures began to circle them, their voices growing louder and more menacing. Greta pulled out a small silver talisman and held it high. The creatures recoiled, hissing and retreating into the shadows. She explained that the talisman was a powerful ward, passed down through generations of night watchers, capable of repelling the creatures. Over the next few weeks, Lucas learned more about the creatures and the history of the Night Watchers. He discovered that the creatures were ancient spirits, bound to the forest by a curse. The Heart Tree was the source of their power, and as long as it stood, the creatures would continue to haunt the village. Determined to end the threat once and for all, Lucas and Greta devised a plan to destroy the Heart Tree. They gathered a group of experienced night watchers and set out on a cold, moonlit night. Armed with silver talismans and enchanted weapons, they approached the clearing. The creatures were waiting for them, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. A fierce battle ensued, the air filled with the sounds of clashing metal and unearthly screams. Lucas fought bravely, his fear giving way to determination. He reached the Heart Tree, and with a powerful blow struck its trunk. The tree shuddered and began to wither, its branches turning to ash. The creatures let out a final anguished wail before vanishing into the night. The Heart Tree collapsed, and the clearing fell silent. The village was safe, and the Night Watchers had triumphed. Lucas and Greta returned to the village as heroes, their bravery and determination celebrated by all. The tradition of the Night Watchers continued, but the creatures were no more, their dark power finally vanquished. Do you enjoy spooky short stories? Consider subscribing. Until next time, friends, good night.